Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Digital Assessments for World Language. My name is Madeline Sexton. I am a Spanish teacher at Eastern High School. I currently teach Spanish 2 and Spanish 4 dual credit, so not the AP side, though we do offer AP. And I've also taught Spanish 1. For whatever reason, I've not taught level 3. I've been at Eastern for 10 years, and it's just worked out that way. A bit of background about my technological situation at the school. Eastern is a one-to-one school. Every student is expected to have a tablet. And as a school, we've adopted Nearpod for wrong presentation. It's okay, digital assessments. We're a one-to-one school, so we've had the opportunity to use lots of digital tools for the past 8 years with students being one-to-one. So in my environment, I've had a lot of experience changing things to digital even before NTI began. Eli, would you like to take a second to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning. It's great to see so many folks here this morning. So Madeline's going to do a wonderful job walking you through this. My name's Eli Beardsley. I am the new instructional lead for world language. So it's nice to see some of you this morning. And again, if you've got questions, I'm here to help. Put them in the chat or email me and I'll get right back with you. So thank you.
Absolutely. If you have questions for me, again, please put them in the chat. And if you have questions about anything else world language that's not directly related to the presentation, reach out to Eli either through the chat today or through his JCPS email. You might have been getting emails from Elisha Beardsley. That is who Eli is. If you have not done so already, please go ahead and take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your school, as well as what languages and what levels you teach, so that I know what audience. So far, it looks like I am working with a very diverse audience for teachers. A lot of middle, high, and elementary here. Welcome, welcome. Glad to see so many faces. So this presentation, again, is on digital assessments for world language as we enter NTI 2.0. We know that we're going to be in the digital environment for at least 6 weeks for the start of the school year. And for most of us, that's at least making it start to finish in 1 unit, maybe more, depending on the situation. So we're going to have to assess summatively at some point. As we go through these digital assessments today, they can be used as formative assessments for high engagement or summative assessments. There's lots of background. As we begin, all of the slides I'm using today are at this web address, tinyurl.com/digital-assessment. Please feel free to follow along on your own device. Take notes as you see fit. You'll be prompted to make a copy of the presentation if you want to take notes, or you are more than welcome to just follow along. I recommend not putting it in presentation mode for yourself, because in the speaker notes section, there are lots and lots of links. Those links are not there for me. Those are not actually speaker notes. They are there for you all. They are links to more information about topics that are covered, more information, more in depth, or if I mention another blog, a book, etc. You should be able to access the presentation right now. Again, if you go to this link, tinyurl.com/digital-assessment. And we can also send a follow-up email tomorrow to everyone who's taken this training that has the slides in it. Let me take note to do that. All right. I want to start today thinking about a quote that I heard recently from Rebecca Blowoff. Rebecca Blowoff is the current actual Teacher of the Year, and she was giving a presentation online recently titled, "Our World Has Changed, but Our Goals Haven't." And I think for us, as we think about assessing our students, as we think about teaching in NTI 2.0, as we think about how we're going to frame our work over the next 6 weeks or more, it's important to think about what our goals are and to really focus on those key goals, because again, our world has changed, our teaching situation has changed, but our goals, what we're trying to make happen for and with students, have not changed very much. So in the chat, I'd like you all to summarize what you feel the goal of a world language class is. And I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to get those goals typed into the chat. What is the goal of the world language class? Expose students to different cultures, absolutely. To bring people together, communicate, global competency, getting into those intercultural communicative standards. Teach learners to communicate in a new language, absolutely. To help students become citizens of the world, communication and cultural competency. Create a solid foundation for learning to communicate in a new language and gaining confidence in branching out to the world around you. Jessica, that is a fantastic goal. Love that. So we have lots about being global citizens and communicating in a new language. So we are wanting students to actually use the language, right? That's the point. So similar to that, why do we assess our students? Specifically, why do we assess our students summatively? Again, in the chat, go ahead and answer. What's the point of summative assessment if our goal is to push our students to be global citizens, highly intercultural, and communicators in another language? To check for understanding, assess communication and cultural skills, accountability, the nitty-gritty of it, to measure growth, to provide feedback. Absolutely. All of these answers are correct. We use summative assessment for lots of complex reasons. To measure output, very true. Intercultural and language growth, check their understanding and to help them. Therefore, if our goal is to see what they can do, to be able to give them feedback on what they do have, to measure to measure their output, to measure their growth, all of that, we're going to want to make our assessments as broad as possible. Before we move on, I want to look at the session goals. So our session goals for today are, number one, I can identify some best practices for assessment in the world language classroom. This is not just for digital assessment. This is a great time for all of us to go back to the basics, to say, this is the basic goal and this is the first steps on how to get there. And remind ourselves what the most essential things for assessment in a world language classroom are. Number two, I can create performance tasks, both formative and summative, using common situation models. As we're going to go into in a minute, performance tasks, performance assessments are probably the best way to measure what students can do, one of the best ways to measure what students can do in the classroom. And today we are going to go through some common situation models to help us develop great assessments for our students, as well as assessments that feel authentic and are clear to students so that they have the best opportunity to demonstrate their capacities. Number 3, I can select appropriate technology tools to facilitate summative assessments. As we are going through NTI 2.0, we're going to have to assess using technology somehow, some way, even if it's just, please write it on a piece of paper and upload it. However, today I'm going to provide a few things that are embedded and some few tips and tricks to get the best work out of students that they are willing to give us. And number 4, I can develop and share assessments that integrate with what I already teach and are JCPS backpack appropriate. Goals 3 and 4 very much go together. We will be looking at technology tools that help polish student work, especially in the presentational mode, so that our assessments that we've already built into our everyday learning, into our curriculum map, can just be morphed into the same items that would go into the JCPS backpack, and that doesn't become an extra task for teachers. One thing this session does not cover extensively is the cheating issue. I've heard from a lot of teachers that they are concerned about how easy cheating is in a technological environment. Ideally, we will be going through ways to increase engagement, to increase authenticity, to increase motivation, so students will have more intrinsic reason not to cheat. And I will give you a couple of tips and tricks on how to tell if students, how to prove if students copied and pasted information from another place. But most of student cheating issues come from lack of understanding of the content, which could totally be on them, or feeling overwhelmed. In the links on this slide, there is a video to a recent presentation on how to facilitate or how to create a classroom learning environment where students are less inclined to cheat. And I highly recommend that you all watch that. I found it very useful. It's a presentation by Kristen Dahl that was for a recent conference from the National Foreign Language Centers. And it's on authentic language versus artificial intelligence. Additionally, there's a blog post links down there from Laura Sexton on her translator policy and how instead of fighting Google Translate or other translators, she gives strong limits for students so that they know, yes, I can look things up when I need to, but I need to provide a body of original work first and foremost. So if those are your concerns, because they're definitely part of mine too, excuse me, I highly recommend checking out those links down there at the bottom of the session goals slide. For those of you who are just coming in, because we just got a lot of people, you can follow along with this presentation at tinyurl.com/digital-assessment. And so when I'm talking about the links that are at the bottom, that's where they are. They're in the speaker notes. So again, tinyurl.com/digital-assessment has all of the slides that I'm using and useful links in the speaker notes. All right, let's start off with some best practices for digital assessment and also assessment in world languages in general. The biggest best practice that we can remember to apply during this time of digital learning is to use performance assessments with our students. So performance assessments are ideal for all students because number one, they approximate proficiency. In a classroom setting, we're never going to be able to make it to true proficiency, or if you do, share your secrets because that's extremely difficult. However, performance assessments are the closest we can get. Everyone talked about how they wanted their students to be able to communicate with the community, to use language in the real world. So we're wanting our students to be proficient, not just producing language in small chunks. And performance assessments are the best way to see that kind of open sandbox world where students can do as much as they can in a more authentic setting. So they increase authenticity both for the teacher and for the student. A well-made performance assessment puts the student in a mindset of a situation they would be in their current lives right now. It's not just, you're traveling to another country, because I know a lot of my students will never do that. But what kind of situations will they use their language in day to day here? As a Spanish teacher, I do have a leg up on that because we have such a large Spanish speaking population in Louisville, and my students use their language with their jobs and with new people that have come to the school. There are lots of situations where students will use the language without leaving this city. We just have to find them and capitalize on that. Performance assessments also allow for demonstration of what students know and can do on a personalized, individualized level. JCPS as a whole is really starting to push for this personal learning track, personalized learning, where students have lots and lots of different, not lots and lots, but students can make their own goals, their own pathway, and their own demonstrations of learning. And performance assessments allow for that. It's not discrete. Everyone has to put the answer A to be correct, or everyone has to fill in the blank with this to be correct. It gives a lot more of that personalized, individualized learning and gives students a chance to express it without being too much of an onus on the teacher at the same time. And finally, performance assessments align with district, state, and national standards. So in the links at the bottom, there are lots and lots and lots and lots of links on this one. So Eli, you're going to have a fun time if you're trying to work on putting the links in the chat. The first is just a poster of what is performance assessment by the TEL project, and why we do it. So if you are being questioned at any point on why assessments are looking very different in your classroom than what your administrator saw when they were in language classes, it's a great way to show the importance of performance assessments, though JCPS is pushing for performance assessments across the board, so it should be pretty easy to get people on board. There's also some national documentation down there if you need to remind yourself or prove to anyone the alignment with standards. So we've got the World Readiness Standards for Language Learning, for learning languages from ACTFL. We've got the NESFL ACTFL can-do statements. We've got the Kentucky World Language Standards, which are under review, but that's what we're going on right now. I've got links to the JCPS curriculum, as well as some pre-existing JCPS performance assessments from about 10 years ago. But if you search for performance assessments online for world languages, you'll find links to what's ours already. They're very popular around the internet. So if you want ideas on performance assessments that you can use or adapt for your own situation, JCPS already has a lot of those available, and those links are again below the slide. Back to our alignment with JCPS. Our performance standards in JCPS are based on proficiency or performance targets. So this is for high school, but we also have these outcomes for middle school and elementary. And the link to those JCPS outcomes and the chart for that is in the notes. So again, if we are trying to get students to a proficiency level, then we probably want their performance level to be at least this or higher, because usually a student's performance and a performance assessment in class is 1 or 2 levels higher than their actual proficiency in a in the wild situation, in an authentic situation with native speakers. And another reason why you might want to use performance assessments is that JCPS already has the rubrics made. For me, rubric making is challenging because I always have a struggle making the right wording. And here, lots of teachers have spent lots of time making the wording on these rubrics accessible for teachers, and they're easy to adapt for students. I personally turn them into a single point rubric where I just have our target level. So with my Spanish 2 students first semester, I would just have the novice high section and then talk about steps to get there or steps to areas where they've exceeded the standard. For semester 2, I do intermediate low. There are also elementary rubrics. And again, the link to the rubrics is in the presenter notes. There are elementary rubrics that are pictorial. So even if this is scary to you and you don't think your students would get it, pictorial rubrics exist. And they're accessible for all levels. So reasons why we would use performance assessments, both for best practice and just for general alignment. Another reason why we would want to use performance assessments is that they align with the quality work protocols. At least at my school, every time we talk about JCPS backpack, every time we have a faculty meeting that includes information about the backpack, we are always using the quality work protocols. And again, link to the JCPS backpack and quality work protocols below. The quality work protocols state that we should be using formats and standards from the professional world rather than artificial school formats. So performance assessments allow for that. They allow for a lot of creation of professional aligned situations. Students can create an infographic or can create an annotated map. Things that are more likely to be used outside of just a school situation, a blog, a website, etc. Connects academic standards and backpack skills with real world issues, controversies, and or local people places. Performance assessments are often a great way to bring in the community into our assessments, either having students say, hey, I'm getting ready to use my language in the community in this way, and here's my practice during class, or actually pushing students to use the language in the community as the performance assessment itself. Connects ideas to broader frames and concepts, and challenges students to create knowledge rather than receive it. Whenever you're using a performance assessment, students are more likely to create on a personalized level, create a larger product, and so not everyone's answers will be the same, which is exactly what we're looking for backpack artifacts. All right, next best practice of assessment in general is to provide choice. Choice increases student motivation, which all of us would prefer more motivated students every day. Also, increased student motivation helps decrease the amount of pure translator use that students have. If students want to learn the language, if students want to do the task, they're more likely to do it of their own will, and on their own academic merit, and the things and display the things they do understand. And in a digital environment, it's an opportunity for students to gain ownership of the task, especially in a digital environment where we have so many fewer relationships, and relationships are harder to build. Students need to find ownership of the class and the content in other ways. And so a performance assessment allows students to express their own thoughts and opinions and selves in ways that traditional multiple choice or fill in the blank assessments do not. Additionally, this also aligns with quality work protocols, where students demonstrate original creative thinking, rather than simply showing students can follow directions or fill in the blanks. And also, the work matters to the student is another quality work protocol. How can we make our assessments matter to the students? Authenticity, choice, open-ended things are more likely to matter to students. Certainly not all students, we have those that struggle, but we can help them, we can facilitate their ownership of tasks through performance assessments and performance tasks in our classroom. Another thing is not every mode has to be assessed at once. This is something that's really hard for me to remember. In a physical classroom space, historically, I've done one mode and then the other in an integrated performance assessment fashion. So I've started with the interpretive mode, and we'll do a reading and or a listening, and then we'll have interpersonal conversations to talk about it, and then students will do a presentational, and assessment takes 3 to 5 days. And that's a lot of time, especially with NTI, as we're seeing our students less. I know in the spring, we were only able to see our students for 50 minutes a week, and that was optional to students. I think there's more coming in the fall. We'll see our students for more time, but probably not every day still. So how can we manage time effectively when we are with students? Can we spread our assessments out? So for me, my plan is to have 2 or 3 weeks of instruction practice with performance tasks embedded as formative assessments, and then do an interpretive assessment, and then a couple more weeks, and then do an interpersonal assessment, and then another week or so, and do the presentational at the end of that, where they're building on the skills and including what we've done in class. So remember, not every mode has to be assessed at once. And during NTI, remember, not every mode has to be assessed every time. You may go back and forth between interpersonal and presentational. Is it ideal? No. Is it what this reality gives us? Absolutely. Regardless, if there are multiple sections to an assessment, ideally they connect. We want everything we do, whether that's in our classes or as daily tasks and activities, or in the assessment, to be connected. Students need to be able to see why we're doing everything in our class more than ever in NTI, because we're not there to prompt them every time. Students have to see a reason to do this work when we're not there. And I'm noticing more and more amongst my students, at least during NTI 1.0, that grades were not the motivation as much anymore. There's a lot more going on. So when we give students a why, that is more likely to get them doing the work and doing it well. Integrated performance assessments, IPAs, are one way to push this connectivity between sections of an assessment. If you are unfamiliar with IPAs, in the links, there's links to the actual book, Implementing Integrated Performance Assessments. My department has that book, and it's super useful. But there's also a podcast and transcript on what is an IPA, so you can get some practical things from other teachers. Examples of IPAs across levels and languages from Carla, at the organization Carla, not a specific person. And then MadameShepherd.com has steps to designing an IPA that can be really helpful in this process. The next best practice for assessment is to remember that assessment is based in backwards design. So you start by identifying your learning targets, and then you design the summative assessment. And then you design learning targets, learning experiences, pardon me, to reach that assessment. Designing the, in the chat, backward design is difficult for me. Backward design is definitely a challenge. It's a different way of thinking. Identifying the targets, finding some way to wrap them up, and then teaching to the test, but in a good way. You want the entire path to be clear for yourself and for students the whole time. It's not just we've gone through every activity that I have for this unit, and so now I have to make a test that covers it. When you have the purpose of an assessment, particularly a performance assessment, at the end of the road, it's much easier to see why you are teaching and why, and for students to see why they're learning. Could I please repeat what is backwards design? Yes. Backwards design is when you start planning your unit at the end. So you start by planning learning targets. You set the learning targets for the unit. From there, you design the summative assessment. What is the end product students will have? And then after that, you design the learning experiences that your students will have, the activities, the tasks in day-to-day class that will help them reach the goals to hit the summative assessment. In the links at the bottom, there's another ACTFL book called The Keys to Planning for Learning, and that includes a whole lot of information about backwards design. So if it's something you're not familiar with, or something you'd like to have more knowledge about, I highly recommend reading that book. You can get it digitally as well. One thing that ACTFL has made open for everyone from the book is a unit plan template. And that link is in the bottom as well. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that in chat. This is a great template for facilitating backwards design. The big thing about this template is you need to make sure to start at the top and work down. Don't skip around with the sections that you fill. They're in that order on purpose. But it's great for helping us organize our thoughts in a way, organize our resources in a way that best facilitates student learning and purpose throughout our lessons and assessments. The final link at the bottom of this slide is a post by the blog Cult of Pedagogy, which is backwards design basics. Again, going back to the our world has changed, our goals have not. Backwards design is really going to help all of us as teachers narrow our focus. In an online environment, we're probably not going to cover as much content, as many lessons. And so we're going to have to say, okay, what are the essentials? How do we determine the essential lasting skills for our students? And how do I communicate those? Which means that some of the fun activities, some of the things we look forward to may not be as much of a priority this year, just because we're having to limit how much we do with students to get them focused on what matters the most, the main goals of each unit. And backwards design and using backwards design principles and templates really help us be able to focus, narrow our focus onto those key goals for students. All right. And then it also helps with the quality work protocol of aligning or exceeding grade level academic standards. We know that the assessments that we do at the end are fully supported by what we taught throughout, because we selected the learning targets, we selected the assessment first, and then did things to support that instead of the other way around. As to digital best practices, we have to make sure we're protecting student information. So when you are selecting the tools that you want to use to assess students, and when I'm selecting the tools I want to use to assess students, we have to make sure that we are using software that is approved for student use by the district. This is a very, very short list. And the way that you check all of that is jcps.me/software, which I'm also putting into the chat. So jcps.me/software, we're going to take a second and look at that website so you know how to navigate it. This is an absolutely essential website for NTI planning, both for assessments and daily tasks. Instead of going to world language or content agnostic, I just search. So one tool that many of us have used for assessment in the past is Edpuzzle. And when you look at Edpuzzle, it says, this software is intended for adult use only, which means we're not allowed to use it with students. Or another one, Nearpod. Do not create student accounts. Students need a code to join. So Nearpod is a good one. It's approved. Everything's fine. And the approval process for these isn't to say got you to teachers. It is the kinds of security that these websites have for student data. Many places that require student accounts because our student emails have first and last name involved in them don't have the insurance or protection around student accounts that are necessary to make sure our students' data is secure. There's the link to this is just above there. Again, it's jcps.me/software. It doesn't hyperlink in the chat, but if you, thank you, Eli. So if there is something, there's an app that I've been interested in lately called Book Creator. And so I searched for Book Creator. Oh, they actually just added it. Book Creator, not approved for JCPS legal -cyber insurance. Lo and behold, not approved. If you ever search for something and it's not here, and it's your job to email your principal or instructional lead to get that software started. So Eli graciously said the last time I gave this presentation that if we email him, he will start looking into these things. I heard about a great software called Edgy. Oh look, an error occurred, could not load. It hasn't been evaluated yet. We don't know if we can use it or not. So please, please, please be careful about student security, student information, and the ways in which we protect all of that by checking JCPS me/software. Again, it's not here to be a gotcha for teachers and to make our lives harder. It's here to protect our data and student data. So as we make our selections, we need to make sure we're using things that are approved. All right. And the last best practice for any technological use is be aware of student access. Depending on the student, they may be working from laptops, Chromebooks, tablets, smartphones, Android, iOS, Microsoft, all kinds of possibilities. They may even have to switch platforms mid-lesson. I had that a lot last year where a student was using the laptop and then their sibling needed to use the laptop for their Google Meet for their class. And so they had to switch to using their phone in the middle of the assignment. Before assigning work, test your tech on as many platforms as possible. If a piece of technology doesn't work well on a cell phone, maybe it would be best to give an alternative or give several options on what kind of technology the student can use to complete that particular task.